Hey folks, in this video I'll be showing you how to set up a PostgreSQL database locally on your machine. So this will run through everything from downloading the software to uploading some data to then being able to connect that database to other services such as a visualization tool like Tableau. So to get started downloading the software, I'm going to come here to the PostgreSQL website and I'm going to go and hit download. This will then take me to the options menu for where to go and download my specific version of PostgreSQL for the type of machine I'm on. So I'm on Windows. So for Windows, I have a specific installer here, which I can go and click through. And then this will ask for which version of PostgreSQL I would like for my machine. So I'm going to go for the Windows one for the latest version, 16.3. Go and hit download. Okay, so in my downloads folder, I've now got this Postgres executable file. I'm going to double click this, which is going to bring up this window. Yes, I will need to have admin rights to install Postgres on this computer, and I'm going to click yes. And after a few seconds, I'm going to get the setup window come through here. So I'm just going to click through some of the options here. There's not much we need to change here. So hit next. This is where we're going to install in your program files. There'll be a folder there that it will install into, and that's okay with me. So next. Then I want to tell you what things it's also going to install with this. So PostgreSQL servers, that's the database we need for this application. pgAdmin 4, this is the SQL client. This will be where you connect to your database and write SQL queries against that database. Stack Builder, this is something that comes with Postgres to allow you to have different add-ons or different drivers install your database. It just makes that process a little bit easier. And lastly, command line tools. This is where I can go and run commands against this database using the terminal. I'm happy with all of these, so I'm just going to click next. And then this is where this is going to be installed. Next. Okay, now the one to remember. So this is where you go and decide your Postgres super user password. So super user is essentially like God mode over this database. You have the ability to build and destroy everything and anything that is made. So these credentials are highly important to remember, and also highly important not to put into the wrong hands, because obviously if anyone has the power to build and destroy everything you own, that's not great. So the super user in Postgres is default name is Postgres, and this is where you can go and give that a password. So effectively these will be our login details to get onto the SQL server. So your username will be Postgres, and then your password will be anything that you type in here. Okay, so I've got my password. Put that in, hit next. Next is the port. This will be important for connecting to the database. Typically this is the standard port for Postgres. So if you don't have anything to change this to, I'd recommend just keeping it as it is. So lastly, we'll be setting up the locale for the database. This is going to control things potentially like language, potentially like how dates are formatted. For me, I don't know what the default locale is specified, so I'm going to go for English United Kingdom. And then this is everything that's going to be set up following that. So I'm going to hit next and next again, and we're going to install. Okay, so that's done. I'm going to keep this ticked and we'll just hit finish to see what Stack Builder is like. Okay, so this is just setting up Stack Builder at the end. So I'm going to pick my Postgres database. So here's a quick overview of the add-ons I could include here. So previous versions of Postgres, if I wanted them. It's not too much of other interest to me here or anything at all. So I'm just going to hit next. At least one package before continuing. Well, I don't want any, so I'm going to go cancel, and we'll cancel out of Stack Builder. Okay, so you've installed Postgres. How do you actually get access to your database? So it's using pgAdmin 4. This is the SQL client that you can see here. Okay, so pgAdmin has loaded up, and I've got basically a load of nothing here. So I've got in the top left, this is my Object Explorer. This is my panel of where my servers are, where my databases are, schemas, tables, etc. So I can open this and I can see it's got the connection already to my local Postgres database set up. With that database already comes a database itself set up called Postgres. This is your default database. So I didn't have to log in at all. So from our setup page, it has taken my username password and applied it here in the connection panel. You can see this here if you right click on your database and hit properties. There will be a section here for connection. Under here you have the host name, the port as we had before, and then the username here. But here it's recognized me as Postgres as that super user for this database. So let's close out of that. And now in Postgres, let's have a look. So there's a lot going on here. The main thing you will be interested in is schemas. So this is your collection of tables. This is where you can contain certain groups of tables together. Under here we have public, which is already open. And under here, even more tools at our disposal for what we want to use. The main ones you're going to be interested in are tables. So this will be where your raw data is kept. And then views. And views are where you've created a SQL query and then you've stored it as a view. So every time you select a view, like you would select a table, that query will be run and results will be returned to you. Okay, so I have this database set up. How can I go and get some data onto this database? I in fact have some data for this very challenge itself. I'm working with this data set that's a collection of all the Lego sets that have been made. I want to go and put this data onto my Postgres database to go and analyze. So how do I go about and do this? So there's a few different ways that I'm going to show you. So one is using the standard import. Another way will be using actual SQL scripts to bring the data in. So one way we can bring data into this view is by using the import CSV option in pgAdmin. To do this, however, we're going to need to know what the table looks like before we bring the data in. So this is the colors table. This tells me about all the parts in my Lego sets, what color they are, what they're called, and the hex codes associated with them. So we've got 4 columns here, and I'm going to need to build that in this as a table here before I can import the data. So I'm going to need to go over here, over to my query tool. If I click that, this will now open up this side menu. So this is where I can now go and input queries against my Postgres database. So while we're here, this is using the default Postgres database. It's also using my username as Postgres. That's why we've got Postgres twice here against this Postgres server here. So you just see a lot of Postgres going on up here. This is how we can go and run, execute the script, but we need to go and write a query. So I need to go and create that table. So I'm going to go and write a create table statement here. Okay, so here's my query to go and create a table. I'm just going to go and hit run on this. So the query has returned successful in so many milliseconds. If I scroll down to my tables, nothing seems to be there. If I go and give this a refresh, now we have a table there. If you don't see a table appearing, you may need to go and refresh the database, refresh the schema itself so you can go and see those changes being applied. So now while we've got our table selected, I can go right click and I can go import export data. So import is what I want to do. Okay, so now it wants me to go and find that CSV file. And there we go. So I've then gone and found that folder on my desktop, which is fine. What type of encoding do I want? Typically for these, I would pick UTF-8 unless you have a particular encoding in mind. I know the CSV is UTF-8 CSV, as I know this. So how the text has been split up, I know it's commas and quotes. That is fine. And the columns to import, that's all okay. Even nice here that it gives you requirements. So some of these columns should be null, not null columns. So I expect the ID to be not null. That's fine. I'm going to include that and I'm going to click OK. Okay, process started, process failed. View the processes. Okay, so I've got an error here. So invalid syntax for big int ID. So what has happened here is that Postgres has gone and taken that first line, all those headers, and says, wait a second, that's not a numerical field. And yeah, it's the column heading. So it's now rejected this process based on that. So I'm going to go back and go and see to import this data again. So right click, import. One thing to point out here, so this under options header, go and tick that yes. Let's go and get OK. And there we go. Jobs are good at A. So this has now been updated nicely. That all works. So I can click out of this, out of these processes. And now here I am. So I'm back with my previous query. What I can do is just comment this out using Control/. So if I do select start from colors and run this, I can then see that data has come back. And that would be my standard process for uploading simple CSV files. Okay, so I've imported some data, but it's in the public schema of my default Postgres database. What would be really helpful is if I could actually set up a database for this data and a schema to handle it. So let's have a look at that. So by this stage, you have created tables, you have created views in the past, but now you're just going to create a database. So I'm going to go and just issue the command create database. I'm going to call this Lego for our data set. And I'm going to go and just run that query. So that has worked. Again, I only got this by this information at the bottom here. Over here, what I'm going to need to do is go over here and refresh. So now I have two databases. So this database is connected, you can see by the color. This one is not. If I click on it, it will burst into life. Now I want to go and create a schema in here. So I'm going to go and say go and create schema in the same way. And I'm going to call this, say, raw or staging to help me with this. So I'm going to call this staging. So if I comment out this query and I go hit run here, so that query is complete. But where did it go? So if I go and refresh this database, I still have my one schema. If I go and refresh this database, I have two schemas. Okay, so what's happened here is I've created my staging schema, except it's fallen into the default database, that Postgres database. And that is due to my connection up here being for the Postgres database, the standard one. Now, in other database technologies, you can use other database connections to go and write, say, your schema to a different database with that schema name. In pgAdmin, you can't. You have to start a new connection to that database that you want to write your schema to. So what we would need to do is to click on our Lego database and then click Query Tool. You'll then see that this is now opened with a new tag, so my database and my username here. And now I can go back, I can go and create a staging schema. Let's refresh the database. And under schemas, I have two. So I have two schemas here now, which is perfect, which is what I wanted. I also have my old schema here under Postgres, and I want to get rid of that. So if I come over to Postgres, I've got create schema. You can also do drop schema. And when I refresh that database, you can see I've only got one schema left. Similarly in here, we have that table that we put into public. I want to get rid of that. And if I want to drop that table, I would use the drop table command on colors. And if I refresh that, I've got no tables visible there. Okay, so that's all cleaned up. Let's get this data into the schema here. Now, one thing to be careful of is when you've created a schema is to make sure that that is going to be the path that you're writing to in this database. So you can see what your schema path is going to be by using the term search path. So here running this show command actually shows me this path. So this is going to be me, that user is going to write to the public schema here. So I don't want that. I want to change it so it writes to the staging schema. So I'm going to change this to using set. Yeah, so I can see that that user path has changed to staging, which is great. So that means that any tables I now write to this database will be populated in staging. Okay, so we set up our database, we set up our schema. We now need to import the data and those tables. So earlier I showed you how you could do that by single files using the CSV command. You can also use a SQL script to bring in data values into your table. So what the script does is it will create a table at the start where it will tell me what the table is called and all the columns and the column types, the data types they should be. Then my insert statement says I want to insert into the colors table. I am going to insert data into these columns, and this is then the values I'm going to put into these tables. So this, as you can sort of see by the little panel on the right hand side, this is quite a long script. I did not write this manually. I used tools to help me put data into this format. So you can use online tools if your data set is not sensitive. In this case, this is a Lego data set. This is something I found online, and I'm using tools to convert a CSV into a SQL file. Alternatively, if you know scripting, you could always connect to your database and write data to your database using Python, some of the Python libraries there, or even R. Okay, to do this, you could either copy and paste the SQL in there, as this is quite a large file. What I'm going to do is open the file in pgAdmin. So go over to the little folder, open file, find my Lego tables, open that, and there is my SQL script here. All I need to do is to hit execute, and this should now populate our tables. Okay, so in 11 seconds or so, I have been able to upload a lot of tables into our database much quicker than if I was using that wizard tool for uploading CSV files. So if I go over to staging, I should now see under tables, yes, so I see 8 tables under there. But if I run this query, I've got an issue saying the table colors doesn't exist, and that is because it's still thinking that we want to set the search path for public when really we want to change that to staging. So we just need to go and do that at the start of these queries when we open up a new query window. So this is something just to be aware of when you're writing like a new script in pgAdmin, just to make sure that path is set. So now in SQL you can go and build your own tables, build views, do some analysis on this work. But there will come a point where you want to actually connect to this data that you've made, or maybe you don't like pgAdmin and want to connect to something else, or you want to say analyze this data in Tableau first to get a feel for things. So we're going to look at connecting, how you can go and connect to this database. But before we start connecting to anything, we have an issue. We have one login for this database, and it gives you access to everything, the ability to build and destroy everything there. So we don't really want to, say, share those credentials in case those got out of hand and then suddenly we'd lost all the data, or we were enabling that access to perform functions it shouldn't do. So it might maliciously remove some objects that we had that we didn't want it to. So what we're going to start on is setting up a role that will only have access to this Lego database, and then assigning a username and password to that role that we can then use for connections in the future. So to do this, you're going to want to collapse out of some of the menus here and come down to login and group roles. So these are some roles that pgAdmin creates by default about how they can go and monitor the site, and you can see like a username role down here. What we want to do, right click and go create login role. So because I want to make this role for my Lego database, I'm going to go just give it a Lego type name, Lego analyst. So in my definition here, I can go and set the password. So I've set a password. I'm going to leave that at that. So privileges. Do I want this role to log on? Yes, I do. Do I want this role to be a super user? No. In this case, I don't want them to have that kind of power. I don't want them to be able to create roles either. I don't want them to be able to create databases. No. So inherit rights here means if you have, say, a set of roles, say if you wanted to make a group of roles for, say, the finance department, you could have them inherit specific functionality based on that group. In this case, there's only going to be one role. So we're going to leave this as it is. So here under membership, this is where I could go and add that Lego analyst role into other roles. So I could say whether it's a member of some of these other standardized roles that are currently here. Okay, the rest is where you can add additional options. We're going to gloss over these. Lastly, I'll just say the SQL here. This is where you can actually go and see the SQL script that will be executed for your role. So if you had several roles you wanted to make, this can be a quicker way of doing it. If you're just getting started, the wizard is quite a helpful way to get through this. So now I've created my role, my Lego analyst. What I need to do is go and assign it to my databases to give it the privileges or the permissions to access the databases and the tables I want it to. So I'm going to have my Lego analyst this logon. I'm going to go over here to my Lego database. This is where my tables are. Right click and go properties. So you want to come over to the security tab where we can grant privileges to different logins and roles. So I'm going to add a role here. So my grantee is going to be my Lego analyst, and then I get to set what permissions they have. So this is where I can decide how much access they have, whether they can do the same as my super user, can they create and destroy things. In this case, I just want them to be able to connect to the database. The with grant option means that they can connect to their database and that they could then go and grant other roles to connect to the database. That's not going to be the case. I'm just going to connect here, and I'm going to save this. So now that role could see this database, so it could go and see it, it could connect to it, but it wouldn't be able to do much more because I haven't given it access to the schemas itself. It should be able to see the public schema by default, but it won't be able to see the staging schema, which is where I've kept all my data. So I'm going to go and I'll go back into properties here. Security, I also want to go and do the same. I want to grant them usage of this. Lego analyst grant them usage so they can go and use the schema. The idea with this is these are our source tables. I don't want them modifying the data or writing the data, so I just want them to be able to use the tables, query them, and if they want to write something, they can write it in the public schema. Okay, so they can use those tables, that's fine. But what I actually needed to do was something else. So I go back into properties, I go over to default privileges. So this then defines the access levels that they have for elements within the schema. So my tables, my sequences, functions, and types. So tables is the important one here. So I want to add a row and go and select my Lego analyst again. So this is then what functions it can go and do. So all obviously does everything. Insert will be adding data to my tables. I don't want it to do that, so I can go, I don't want that one. I want select, so they'll be able to say do select star for my table. That's fine. I don't want them to update the values. I don't want them to delete the table. I don't want them to truncate the table, which is just removing all the data from it. Don't want any of these other actions they'll be able to do. So just selecting data from the table. Okay, and lastly for my table permissions, what I'm going to do is check out the grant wizard. So here it'll have all these different object types in my staging schema. I'm going to click all of those, hit next, and I want to go and grant these items. So I want to go and grant this for my Lego analyst. I also want them to be able to select these different tables. That works. I'm going to hit next. And so this will then go and write the queries to go and grant select on all of these individual tables for me. Go and click finish. So under public, we're just going to go and have a look to double check what we've got here. Okay, so there's some default privileges already provided by public, but if I wanted to ensure that my Lego analyst could go and write data to this, I can go and add a new item. Lego analysts, go and all, so can create and can use. Similarly with tables, I could go and add a new item in here for Lego analysts just so that they can perform all the actions on the tables that they want. Again, we can see the SQL there as before. Okay, so now I've set up this login for my database for only access the data in Lego. That's really good. So now I can go and use those details to go and connect to this database via other tools. Okay, so this is a tool called DBeaver. This is like another SQL client that you can go and use to run and execute queries here and connect to many databases. You may want to use something like DBeaver if you're not happy with pgAdmin or you have other SQL databases that you want to connect to too. So I can go and start up a new database connection here. And so I'm given a range of options of different ones to pick from. So I'm going to go Postgres. Okay, so I'm going to hit next. So this is going to be my default options of how I'm going to configure to connect to this database. So my host is definitely localhost. This is the default port number that we set up at the beginning. And then I need to pick which database. So this is pointing at the default Postgres database. What I can go and do is change this for Lego. So next we need to log on. You remember that we made a username and password for this Lego database called Lego Analyst, so that's what we're going to use in this case. Equally, you can log in with the super user name and password. It's just we made that login to only have access to the Lego data. Okay, so I've entered that username and password. You may need to go and get a driver for this connection, but always best to go and test the connection, and hopefully it comes back with yes, saying that I've been able to connect to my Postgres database, and this is the driver that we'll be using for this. You might need to download this driver and install this. And here I can start opening up this database. I can see my Lego database. I can see my two schemas. In bold, it has put public. That is because that is the default one. On my connection, I've got my tables. What I need to do is then go and query these. So what I want to do is go up to here and go new SQL script and click that. Have this here. What I can do here is I can go down, right click and go generate SQL and go select, and that will bring up those columns for me. I'm going to copy those, I'm going to paste those in there, hit run, and I'm going to see that query come back there at the bottom. If you are having issues, say you get a permission denied issue come up, I would recommend you go back and check the permissions at the database level, at the schema level, and at the table level, just to make sure that that username password has access to everything at those stages. They will need both usage and the ability to select at least to go and get to this stage. Okay, so that was DBeaver. Now let's go and have a look what you could do with Tableau. Okay, so I've opened up Tableau. I am in the professional version of Tableau, which gives me access to this section on the left here where I can go and connect to different servers. So if I go and click more, I can now go and search for Postgres. Got my PostgreSQL there. And now I can enter the same details again. So localhost, database is Lego, username and password is going to be as before. And there we go. If I get my username and password correct, I am in. So here you can see that database. You can then see all those tables there as well. You can also do elements of custom SQL if you want to, say, do a quick join or something here. But a lot of this you can do in Tableau natively. So again, I can bring in that colors table there. So I'm going to set this as an extract so it doesn't start querying my databases. So if you have a live connection, every time you start interacting with your visualization, you'll be querying that Postgres database. You may not want that for performance reasons. So I'm going to save as an extract and then save this as a TWX file. So now I can just start bringing my tables in, having a look at these and think, okay, I can now go over to my sheet, start having a look at some of this data. So we can have a look at some of these spare parts. I can go and do what it can do, like a count of the different. So I can do a count of the different part numbers, so I can see how many of these parts are spare and how many aren't. I could also then break this down by different colors if I wanted to, if I knew those IDs. In this case, you might want to do some SQL joins to start with, or even using that custom SQL to help write a little SQL script to help you understand, say, what 15 means in the context of this. But this can be a nice way to start exploring your data while you're still working with it in SQL. Okay, and last bit, connecting to Python. So Python, you're going to need this copg2 package. So you're going to need to install that with pip install. You're going to set your username and password. I would recommend reading this in from a file. I've done this just so you can see what all the data looks like when I input it. But yes, don't go and hard code your username and password in a Python script like this because it's quite easy for someone to find and go and connect to your database and take all your data. Next, we're going to use the connection to that database. So this is where we're drawing on the package that we've installed to connect, and this will be our connection string. So the database we're connecting to, which is Lego, those username and passwords, which hopefully you've read in from a file or other service, were localhost and the same port as always, the default. Next, we're going to actually write in text what our query is. So in this case, select star from table. Note that I have put the schema in there as well because I know what's going to happen. It's going to look in the public schema and think, I can't find colors, and it's there. So this is in double quotes. You can also have queries in triple single quotes, which then allows you to do multi-line queries if you want to. I find this a bit easier to read. This is then, so we've defined our query, we've got our connection, this is then when we go and execute it. So we've set a cursor here, and this is when we go and execute the query and then return the results. And then at the end, we just close the connection query altogether. So I'm going to hit run on this. And there we go. So we can see here, it's going to run that script. And then this is the results that have come back. So all that data from the colors table has come back to my query window. So you could go take this, put this into a data frame, do some analysis with it there, do some manipulation. Similarly, you could also import data this way by connecting to your database and then inserting. You've just got to make sure that your username password can allow you to write data to your database. Okay, so this has been a quick run through of how you can get set up using Postgres. We set up the database, we imported some data, we were then able to connect our data to other services using a username and role. So this has been quite a broad overview. There will be lots more you can dive into here, but I hope this gets you enabled and ready to start progressing with SQL on your local machine. And that's all from me, so I'll see you in the next one. Bye.